All right, it's still, I think, morning. 1 minute, so good morning, everyone. I always like to poll the audience before I start a presentation with who's here, but maybe the most important question is who's hungry right now? I see lunch is delivered, so I will go relatively quickly, I think, through my presentation today and make sure that everyone gets their lunch in relatively the same time frame. So the project I'm presenting on today has recently wrapped up, although I do have some additional grant requests in to continue the project because I think it is of significant value to folks in the north, whether you're a farmer, whether you are related to an agri-food system, whether you eat. I think it's really incredibly important to have access to food animal veterinary care. So a really quick overview, I'll talk about the issue, our sort of hypothesis when we went into this, our objectives, data collection, our insights, and then some of our next steps. One of the most important things, though, I do want to highlight is that this was a collaborative project between myself and two colleagues from the Ontario Veterinary College, Dr. David Kelton, who has recently retired, and Dr. Stephen Roche. And we also had a number of graduate students supporting us, which has been an incredible experience for everyone. So the background on the report, and I'll stress that I've worked extensively on looking at barriers to agriculture in Northern Ontario, and since 2015, two projects completed, identified the biggest issue for many livestock producers was access to veterinary care. So over 8 years, this was sort of the top issue, bringing it up constantly through our research reports. It's not something new that I've heard about. It's definitely a concern, I'm sure, for a lot of folks in this room. It's something that's been ongoing for a long time. And as a spoiler, it's likely not something that's going to get better anytime soon. But when OMAFRA came out with the funding call through the partnership they have with the university, they essentially wanted a continuation of previous research I've done that focused extensively on this aspect of food animal veterinary care. The focus initially through the call was underserved areas. Our theory was the north was the worst, we should focus on the north. Where the issue is greatest is where we really should put most of our attention. And really the main focus of this was an understanding that for animal welfare as well as food safety, you have to have adequate access to veterinary care. And there wasn't really a good understanding of what that access looked like, what the limitations were, and how we can improve that access. So we had a number of objectives there. Essentially, I won't read through these again just for timing. Essentially, we just want to know how bad is the issue and what are those solutions that we can recommend to a variety of different groups. We had a lot of data collected on this project, including mapping data, surveys, interviews. We've talked with producers, we talked with veterinarians, we talked with those in the agri-food sector, however they were linked, as well as those representing municipalities and a whole host of organizations. What I'm going to focus on today are 3 different groups and their insights on this project. So veterinarians, producers, and students. And I'll note that given that the future solution is ideally coming from those students graduating and setting up care in the north, a practice in the north, they had some really, really insightful and honest opinions in this project. So veterinarians, they talked extensively about challenges in their field. And in particular, we spoke with, I think, almost every veterinarian that was in Northern Ontario, as well as we had a survey for Northern vets as well. And in particular, and this, again, nothing I say here is likely going to be a surprise to anyone in this room, distance to farms was a huge concern for them. In the winter, when weather is terrible, the risks are greater for that veterinarian that's traveling. And it's really hard to make sure that every farmer in their community, and the geographic area of a community is significantly greater in the north than in the south. And so those travel distances were really, really extensive. They did speak to the veterinary assistance program as essential, and one of the key pieces of that is discounts or rebates they get on mileage, and saying that if those grants went away, it's just not worthwhile to travel to these farms that they think are a significant distance away. Retirements are anticipated and will worsen the situation, and many of the veterinarians said, I want to retire, I should be retired, but I just can't. There's that sense of duty and pride in what they do in many situations. And this weekend I was speaking with the farmer in the north, and they said, we don't have a vet anymore. Our vet retired, we have no access. And so that's a year since this project wrapped. Already one of those veterinarians has retired. It is their right, absolutely, but it worsens the situation. And one of the comments that we kept hearing is we need solutions that are northern specific. What we often see in the province is this one-size-fits-all mentality. Solutions are often devised in southern Ontario and then applied to the north. And the context in the north is so different that that just doesn't work. Producers were also incredibly honest, which was very much appreciated. They spoke of just essentially access to veterinarians was very, very limited. And in many cases, emergency care was restricted or non-existent. Many farmers actually spoke of moving, in particular those who moved from southern Ontario to the north, to signing a contract with their veterinarian that said they acknowledge they will not get emergency care. The distance is too great, the veterinarian is at capacity, they cannot provide that care. And almost like a waiver situation that you agree that you are waiving those rights. You can imagine for a veterinarian to have to offer or to require that, how daunting their practice must be. And for a farmer, the concern and fear and the impacts, because at the end of the day, this is their livelihood, and there's, of course, issues of well-being for the animal and animal welfare for that farmer as well. And to know that in an emergency situation, you have no vet access was incredibly worrying for many of them. They also spoke extensively about academia as probably not promoting the North as an opportunity, and absolutely the students confirmed that. And that many said that if this doesn't work and the situation doesn't get better, they're probably going to leave their livestock practice alone. They're going to go into a different type of farming. That one there, that answer, or that concern definitely got folks at OMAFRA concerned because they have been promoting the North as this incredible opportunity for beef farming in particular. But farmers who sort of bought into that dream have said, no, it's not going to work. I will go into something else. I cannot continue this stress and this concern and just not having access to a veterinarian. Students were fun. So I don't teach in the vet program. I'm in a separate college. So the students were incredibly honest with me because I don't grade them. So it was really easy for them. And they spoke of a lot of challenges within the vet program, as well as when working in the field. And I will say I'm guilty of this first one. There is this sense when you talk with farmers, the easiest thing to talk about is farming. I get it all the time, and I usually have a slide that shows me on my family farm as a kid to prove that I have that credibility with agriculture. But farmers ask those students who are coming potentially for externships with the vet or that just want to get experience on the farm, the first question is always, where did you grow up, or what kind of farm did you live on? And they're important questions for sure. But anytime a student came from an urban area or didn't grow up on a farm, they sense this, you shouldn't be here. I don't trust you with my animals, you're an outsider, I don't know why you're here. And for students who have a genuine interest in going into large animal practice and want to work with farmers, they lacked all confidence as a result of this. And so there is, I think, a little bit of effort on the side of the farm community to potentially welcome this future veterinarians and to recognize that just because you didn't have the, I'll say privilege, because I do feel privileged of growing up on a farm, that your credibility shouldn't be impacted by that. The other thing that was really interesting was attached to different types of practice. And students talked extensively about how when you go into the program, faculty, adjunct potentially like Stephen, who aren't full-time professors but teach a lot at the university, talk about how or where to make money. And as a student, you can imagine you have a lot of debt, you want to make money. They were pushed into companion practices or small animal practice. Very few people were pushing or promoting the idea of large animal practice. And so for students in this program, all they heard was, if you want to make money, companion animals. Leave the other stuff behind. Cats and dogs are where the money is. And so it was funneling students into this idea that A, you can't be financially viable if you go into large animal practice, and B, the real opportunities only exist in companion animals. And so students were sort of getting that into their head and repeating that to years after them. So doing no service to any of those students who had an interest in large animal practice. And then the last one, and of course, money is always a good motivator. So they talked about opportunities for scholarships, debt forgiveness, opportunities to do an externship in Northern Ontario and having it pay a little bit better. So when students in their program have to do externships, they get the same sort of credit regardless of where they go. And they flagged if there was a greater grant to go to Northern Ontario, housing is more limited, costs, we saw some food costs that were much higher. It's easier to want to make that sacrifice because an externship, regardless, is a sacrifice because you don't make money. If there was a bit more of an opportunity to go to Northern Ontario with a greater grant, I would choose that option. But right now, I can stay in Southern Ontario, live with somebody I know, and save that cost. And I think I'm getting close to wrapping up, so this is going well. What we came up with was 4 different groups for recommendations. Now, I'll flag producers aren't included for recommendations because I don't know, besides advocation, what producers can really do at this point. And I've completed 2 other studies that have recommendations for farmers. So their voice has been heard in many things, and I don't want to put more burden onto farmers to help solve this problem. And problem is gentle. I do think in Northern Ontario, it's at crisis point right now. So for government, it was really about reviewing current funding programs like FAP, as well as increasing first student externships in Northern Ontario. I will note that since this project has completed, the provincial government did commit, I think it was $900 million in funding to veterinary students if they move north or to underserved areas. And I'll flag this, I think it comes up somewhere else in here about northern-only policies. So that announcement is amazing. It's incredible, $900,000. I think it works out to if you move to an underserved area and have a practice, over 5 years you get $10,000 a year, something like that. But it's for any underserved area in the province, not just Northern Ontario. And what we heard throughout this project is there's many places in Southern Ontario that are also struggling. So that isn't really funneling students or graduates to Northern Ontario. For veterinary organizations, CVO has their own study going on this, and so we sort of said, keep doing what you're doing. We've done ours. Ours is sort of wrapping, and to keep their task force focused on this because it is a crisis, and CVO doesn't just focus on large animal practice. They should also increase the use of RVTs in rural areas, and so recognizing the value of veterinary technicians. Similar, I think, to what we've done with nurse practitioners. It's a good resource and should be better utilized. Academia, and it's easy to say this as someone who works there, needs to do more and needs to do better. It is a disservice to students to only focus on where, I don't want to say easy, but it sounds like that's how it gets strategized, that this is easier money to make. That's not helping students. It's not going to benefit them in the long term. It's not going to benefit the industry, and it's not going to benefit the university to hear that all the program does is talk about how to make money. So we talked about recruitment strategies. There's this logic that if you're from the north, you're more likely to return to the north. It is easier to convince a student from Northern Ontario to go back than it would be someone who grew up in Toronto. The logic is there. And again, since wrapping this project, it's really exciting to see that the University of Guelph has partnered with Lakehead University to offer, I think it's 20% increase in enrollments for Northern students. So their program is 2 years at Lakehead. It's for Northern students who will then come to Guelph to complete their degree. But it means 20 more students going through the program, which really does represent a 20% increase. Now, I won't be under any illusions and say our project did that, our study made this happen, but our study provided the data that the university needed to help demonstrate the value of that partnership and why they had to look for a Northern-specific solution. And the last one is municipalities. There's been a lot of talk about sort of attraction, retention for migrants within the province as well as new immigrants, and this feeling and sense of welcoming and being welcomed. And so there is a movement of folks from other countries, other provinces that have experiences, that have the knowledge, and it's about trying to attract them. One of the students who was on the focus group with us had talked about she was a large animal practice, she grew up on a dairy farm, she's so excited to graduate. She had already been headhunted by a practice in Alberta, and the signing bonus was insane. So she was moving to Alberta as soon as she was done her degree. That's challenging. Northern Ontario is already competing with Southern Ontario, and now other provinces who recognize the value of these students, who recognize that demand and the sort of niche market that there is for large animal practice, and is sort of swooping in, not the province itself, but practices are swooping in and attracting those students and removing them from the province. And that's a huge challenge. And so some concluding thoughts as I wrap up, as we get into lunch today, is that this problem isn't going to go away quickly. It's not going to get any easier without those interventions. I think those 2 announcements over through 2023 were incredibly important. It demonstrates, I think, the value of collaboration in working together. It demonstrates the importance of this research, and to those in this room, hopefully you'll see some of the positive impacts of that new investment. But the collaborative piece is really, really critical here. The partnership between the University of Guelph and Lakehead is impressive, that funding from the provincial government is helpful, but again, I think there needs to be a bit more of a focus on those northern-centric solutions. Funding for northern solutions is the only way that it will help the north. Most programs, again, are devised in Southern Ontario, are applicable province-wide, and it's hard when you're already competing to then be competing with Southern Ontario for the same resources. So as I wrap up, I just want to acknowledge a lot of people supported this project, and there's a lot of acronyms on there. It was the only way to get this all on the slide. But in particular, NOFIA was a huge help with this research, and so great thanks to NOFIA in particular, and of course, thanks for letting me come here today and speak to this. And then, of course, also recognizing the sponsor for this research being OMAFRA. And so my contact details are there. The report is available on my website, so if you wanted to get into it in more detail, if you want to chat, you can send me an email. Happy to talk and answer any questions during lunch or later today. So again, thank you for your time.